Hello. It's great to see you guys. Maria, I love that you're in my class again this year.
I'm glad to be back.
Thanks. It's great to see all of you guys. Wonderful. Anybody have any questions? Feel like you're doing pretty well? All right. So I'll send a message because not everybody's here at the very beginning to hear this, but I am going to be sending out progress reports at the end of next week. The end of this week or the beginning of next week. Now, I don't take off points for anything that's submitted after the due dates, but the only thing I have to go on for progress reports are the due dates. So if you're far behind, you're going to get a report saying that your grade isn't great. So just, you have a few days now that you can use to get caught up to those due dates before the progress reports go out. Your parents will get a copy of your progress report as well. So, all right. Oh, Luke, you got a buddy? Yeah. All right. If nobody has any questions, we will go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen with you. Okay. All right. So, as with regard to these live classes, if there's ever anything you guys want more information about, or just a new topic, something that you hear about in the news and you want to know more about, please let me know, because I like to fold things in to make this your class, to make it something that's more meaningful for you rather than just listening to me talk. It's nice if I can answer some of your questions or give some more information. So I'm always happy to do that. Okay, so a couple of reminders here, just a reminder that we are on, that says Pacific time, but it's all the times. We have a time zone complication. So AIM Academy is set for Eastern time, and there is no way that I can change that. Some of you live in different time zones. So what that means is if you live in Pacific time, your due date is actually 9 p.m. rather than midnight. And there just isn't any way that I can change that. But I post assignments at least 2 weeks before their due date, usually closer to 3. So I feel like that gives you plenty of time. So those 3 hours difference shouldn't be a major problem for you. Just make sure that you plan to submit your assignments by the Eastern time, midnight on the due date there. And do remember that I don't ever take off points if they're a little bit late. I would rather that you took your time and did a good job rather than trying to rush to do something at the very last minute. Also, this plagiarism check, for right now, we're just going to ignore it. I've removed it from whatever assignments I can remove it from. We're having some problems with it. One thing that it's doing, plagiarism check, if you copy the questions into your response, it's like automatically giving you a 50% plagiarism as if you plagiarized the questions, which you're clearly not doing. So let's just ignore it until we get it figured out. So I don't think it's there. If you see it, let me know, because I took it out of as many as I could find. All right, also, final little bit of information. Please make sure you number your answers in the exams and use the number that I gave the question. I mean, that's a little bit confusing. So an example, if I have, yes, to the student who asked the question, if I have, say, 8 questions on an exam, number your answers 1 through 8. Don't skip answering altogether. Don't number them differently. Don't put them out of order. It just makes it too hard to grade. Okay. All right. So I also got a comment, started my experiment. Nothing has happened yet. That's fine. Even if absolutely nothing happens in your experiment, you can still do a good lab report, or you can still learn a lot from that experiment. So don't worry about that if that is what ended up happening. Okay, so moving on. What do we call the branch of biology that deals with the relationship of organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings? Hint, it's what we're studying right now. What do we call that branch of biology? Yep, ecology. Good, Luke. We call it ecology. Now, we're going to do a little bit of a review from last week and a little bit of an introduction to content from this week, but we'll start out with couple of little cartoons here. I like this one. I just know this is going to mess with the ecosystem. Do you ever think about that, whether we're alone in the universe? Is there anybody out there who might be showing up? Probably not in flying saucers, but who knows? I do think it would change things on Earth, though, if that were to happen. All right, here's another joke for you. What kind of fish is made of 2 sodium atoms? Anybody know what the chemical symbol for sodium is on the periodic table? What is sodium? Sodium is Na. So 2 sodium atoms, tuna. Kind of fish made of 2 sodium atoms, tuna. And what's the difference between weather and climate? Luke.
Weather is the day-to-day temperatures and change. So one day it could be rainy, another day it could be cloudy, another day it could be sunny. However, climate is the general sense.
Yep, you're absolutely right. This is a joke, though. You're right about the actual definition, the difference between weather and climate. You're right. But the joke version of this is you can't weather a tree, but you can climb it. All right. And who's the new heifer? Never seen herbivore. Herbivore. And I love this one. I asked around and nobody heard anything. So of course, the joke is if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, doesn't make a sound, nobody heard anything. All right. So let's talk about about ecology right now. So remember that habitat is defined as the environment that an organism lives in. So your habitat would be your home or your neighborhood, maybe even your town. It would be the environment that you spend most of your time in, that you interact with other beings in. And I think one of the most fascinating things about organisms that share habitats is the way they interact with one another. So we're going to talk about those interactions today. Of course, there's competition within any kind of a community that we have. So remember, a population is all members of the same species living together at the same time. Think bowl of popcorn, population. They're all the same in the same bowl at the same time. A community, though, is different species that are living in an area at the same time. So that would be like trail mix in a bowl would be an example of a community. So organisms interact within their community. This is a little bit of a review, yeah. So organisms interact within a community, and the one way they do that is by competing. So think about some of the reasons that they might compete. Why might organisms compete within a community? Abigail.
For food.
Yeah. One of the main reasons that they're going to compete is for food. Some other reasons might be they might compete for water. They might compete for shelter, or like nests or caves or burrows, homes. They might compete for mates. They're going to compete when resources aren't enough for everyone to have plenty. Then they have to compete for those resources. So here is, we got some competition going on here. These are different members of different species all competing for the one animal that is, that is there for food. So one way that animals in a community, in an ecosystem, interact with one another is through symbiosis. So symbiosis is a long-term relationship between 2 or more different species and the organisms within those species. So 2 organisms belonging to 2 different species live closely together and have specific interactions. So the word comes from the Greek word symbiosis. That means living together. That's how we get that word. And there's 3 ways that organisms can be in a symbiotic relationship. This is not review anymore now. So you'll be getting symbiosis this week. But I want to go into some detail about it because I think it's pretty important and easily confused. So commensalism, that is where one species benefits, but the other is neither hurt nor helped. One is mutualism, where both species benefit, and the other is parasitism, where one benefits and the other is harmed. So you probably have all heard the term parasite before. Parasite's something that hurts you. A mosquito is a parasite. It gets its blood meal from you, but it leaves behind that, bumpy itch that is not fun. So that's a parasite. You also probably know what mutual means. If something is mutual, it means it's good for both. It's mutually beneficial. So the only hard one to remember here is commensalism. Commensalism is neither mutualism nor parasitism. So it's where one of the two species benefits, but the other isn't affected at all. So this little animation, right, this little drawing will show you all three kinds of symbiosis. Now, keep in mind that they interact in these ways also in order to get what they need. The same reason they would compete, they use these symbiotic relationships to get the things that they need, to get food, to get shelter, to get protection sometimes, maybe sometimes even transportation. So the three kinds of symbiosis are mutualism. We would say that's a plus-plus relationship where they both benefit. Parasitism is a plus-minus. One benefits, the other is harmed, and the other is commensalism, where the little one is benefiting because it's getting shade, while the big one is not, doesn't care. It's just there. All right, so let's look at each of these three different kinds of symbiosis. One example of commensalism is the cattle egret and cows. So the cows walk along, and as they're walking, they stir up the grass, and they raise up the grasshoppers and the beetles as they're walking. Now the cow isn't benefiting from that at all, but the cattle egret is. The bird gets food. So what page is our lesson on? This isn't really a lesson today, Luke. This is just kind of a synopsis of the lesson. Okay, so here's a little less cartoon for commensalism. Barry Barnacle has a lot of time to ponder the deeper meaning of commensalism on his whale ride. If I'm neither helping nor hurting the whale, do I even exist? Existential crisis in a barnacle. I don't know. All right, so commensalism would be what we call a +0 relationship, where this species is unaffected. It's not hurt, it's not helped, but this one is benefiting. So I have some videos. I found a video that I think does a good job of explaining these three kinds of symbiotic relationships. And I broke it up into 3 parts to make it a little bit easier to watch. So let's watch the part about commensalism.
Here in nature, plants and animals interact all the time, but it can be a lot more complicated than just one thing eating another. These relationships between two different organisms can be examples of what we call symbiosis. Symbiosis can be defined as any kind of a close, long-term biological interaction between two different organisms. These interactions can be mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic. Today, we're going to explore the incredible world of commensalism. This big web is the home of a female spider of the genus Nephila. In her web are BB-sized spiders called dewdrop spiders, gleaming silver droplets sprinkled about. Nephila could care less. She doesn't seem to notice them. The prey Nephila wants are the larger things that fly or jump into her web. The dewdrop, on the other hand, is there to grab the smaller prey that Nephila discards. It also likes to drink the drops of dew that collect on Nephila's silken lines. The two species of spiders are feeding at the same table, you might say. And that describes commensalism. Commensalism is a symbiosis in which members of one species gain benefits, while the other species is neither benefited nor harmed. In Costa Rica, army ants roam freely over the floor of the jungle, ravaging everything in their paths. Other insects either flee or are carried off for dinner at a later time. This is an opportunity that can't be passed up. Numerous species of birds, such as the wood creeper, have become specialists at following army ants just to catch the insects stirred up in the chaos. Once again, commensalism and symbiosis in action.
All right, the next kind of symbiosis then is mutualism. So that's where both benefit. Both, in this case, the otter and the kelp are going to benefit from the relationship with one another. So the otters help the kelp by eating the sea urchins, and then the kelp provide an anchor for the otters so they don't drift away while they're sleeping. Commensal or mutualism would be what we would call plus plus. They both benefit. Think about what each of them are going to get in the relationship together. So they both are going to benefit from the relationship with one another. So here is a video about mutualism.
In mutualism, two organisms are in a relationship in which both members benefit. A classic example of this is the relationship between plants and pollinators. It's basically a win-win situation. Pollinators, like bees and butterflies, fly from flower to flower, feasting on nectar. In the meantime, the pollen that sticks to their bodies transfers from one flower to the next. The pollinated flowers are now able to develop into fruits. The insects get food, and the plants get pollinated. Like I said, a win-win situation. In South Florida, the corky stem passion vine is protected by a nasty little ant about 1/20th of an inch long called Wasmannia, the little fire ant. The ants are attracted to the plant, which not only provides nectar in its flowers, but from small nectaries on the stems of the vine as well. These little pots are filled with a nutritious liquid for the ants. The zebra longwing is one of 3 species of butterflies that lay their eggs exclusively on passion vines. The larvae, from the time they hatch, feed voraciously on the plant. Here's where Wasmannia comes in. In some cases, Wasmannia munches into the tiny butterfly eggs, killing them in the process. At other times, the ants merely check on the eggs as if they have other plans later on. Savagely, the ants stab into the tender larvae just as they're hatching and inject venom into them. The ants get food. The plant gets protection from herbivores. That's mutualism. We find mutualism as well under the sea. The polyps of corals have green algal cells called zooxanthellae living within their tissues. The algal cells provide sugars which they make through photosynthesis, something the polyps can't do. The polyps, in turn, provide a protected place to live, an animal and a plant, benefiting each other in a close relationship.
All right, we'll talk more about that in just a second. All right, so the third kind of symbiosis is parasitism. So that's where one species benefits while the other is harmed in some way. So mistletoe is an example of a parasite because it doesn't have roots of its own. So it attaches to a tree and takes nutrients from the tree. The tree slowly becomes weaker and weaker until eventually it dies. Now, the parasite doesn't kill the host. The parasite does damage to the host that sometimes can weaken it enough that it will die. And a parasite relationship would be one that we would call a plus-minus relationship. All right, here we go.
The grasses of the Everglades are sometimes attacked by a parasitic plant called love vine. The name is misleading. If we look closely, we see that this love vine has little projections that penetrate the grass stems, sucking the life out of the plant. This is a great example of parasitism. In a parasitic relationship, the parasite benefits, but the host is harmed. Almost all animals are parasitized in some way, often by several different kinds of parasites at the same time. We humans have lots of them, like these mosquitoes that are sucking my blood. A parasite like this on the outside of the body of its host is called an ectoparasite. Ticks and leeches are ectoparasites as well. It's important to note that a mosquito bite is not a defensive sting, like you might get from a wasp if you accidentally disturb its nest. No, the mosquito is simply getting a meal, and only female mosquitoes feast on blood. They require a blood meal in order to produce their eggs, which hatch into larvae, which develop into pupae, which ultimately split open, and onto the surface of the water steps a new generation of mosquitoes. And this is what makes the female mosquito an ectoparasite. She gets what she needs, my blood, and her host, in this case me, gets harmed. Man, it's itchy. Let's get out of here. In parts of the tropics, a biting mosquito may inadvertently inject the microscopic plasmodia organisms that cause malaria. The plasmodia enter the red blood cells in the bloodstream of the host. They reproduce there and cause the corpuscles to explode. The result can be a feverish death. Any parasite attacking the inside of the body of its host is called an endoparasite. The human tapeworm is another endoparasite. You could have a 30-foot worm in your intestines, holding on by means of sharp hooks protruding from its head. The worm gets the food you need, helping itself, but hurting you in the process. That's parasitism. You might think parasites are just plain nasty, but they actually play a very important role. Without parasites, their host species can very well overpopulate an ecosystem, putting too much stress on the resources.
All right, so those are the three kinds of symbiotic relationships. Now we have to remember that there can be a wide variety of these benefits, especially when we're talking about mutualism. So sometimes they both benefit equally. Sometimes one benefits a lot while the other benefits a little. And one example where they both rely a lot on each other is the acacia tree and the acacia ants. So ants live inside the spines, like you can see the hole there. They go down in, they hollow those spines out. The queen ant lives inside there where she lays her eggs. The tree gives food and nectar to the ants. Okay, so that's how the tree or the ants benefit. They get a place to live, they get food, and they get nectar. How does a tree benefit? Well, these ants are like little guards. They protect the tree from organisms that would want to eat them, and they will savagely attack any predators, even bigger animals that might want to eat those leaves. So I have one more video for today. I want to show you guys about this acacia relationship.
Whenever a huge tree falls in the Costa Rican rainforest, a gap of sunlight is formed in the canopy. New life competes for this light, like this vine racing this sapling upward. But there's one tree that never has any competition, thanks to an incredible symbiotic relationship it shares with an ant. The swollen thorn acacia and its namesake, the acacia ant, have developed harmonious roles in each other's lives. The ant's role is as protector. If any of those vines try to steal the acacia's light, the ant's security guards go to work. A few good chomps on the vine stems, and it's lights out for the vine. The ants don't stop there. This relatively huge grasshopper may think it's going to take a few bites out of the non-poisonous acacia, but the ants take a few bites out of it instead. And they throw in a few stings for good measure. In exchange for all this protection, the tree takes on the provider role. It gives the insect everything it needs in terms of food and shelter. These little nodules, or nectaries, secrete a sweet nectar for the adult ants to eat. And these brownish pods at the end of some leaves are the perfect, nutrient-packed food for the ants' developing young, called larvae. The acacia ant larvae live down hollowed-out thorns at the base of the acacia leaves. Some will eventually grow into adults with wings and will fly off to replicate this evolutionary masterpiece in a new acacia.
Pretty cool, pretty cool. All right, so I want to do a scenario now about symbiosis, a case study, where you're going to tell me, I'll give you a little information, then you're going to tell me what kind of symbiosis it is. So let me drag that back out there. So now I want you guys to imagine a coral reef off the coast of Australia. This is Australia here. This is Australia here. And this is the reef that we're talking about, Ningaloo Reef. Now, scientists are conducting a study there because they want to understand the relationships in coral growth in this Ningaloo Reef. So we're going to talk about the different kinds of symbiosis in the coral reef here. Now, this is a coral reef, and coral reefs are primarily made of a chemical called calcium carbonate. This is what the chemical structure looks like. So this calcium carbonate is secreted by tiny marine animals called polyps. So these are the coral polyps right here. They're about the size of a pencil eraser, and coral are related to the jellyfish and the sea anemones, and they tend to live in the colonies that form the structure of the reef. So the calcium carbonate is there to protect them. It's an outside protection. And it's the same thing as a clam shell or an oyster shell or a snail shell. They also secrete calcium carbonate to give them their hard shells. Now, when these polyps die, that calcium carbonate stays behind. The soft part, the inside, the polyp dies, but the calcium carbonate stays there. And that then is a foundation that new polyps are going to come along and grow on. Over time, that's going to build up to one of these massive coral reef structures. There's a couple different kinds of coral reefs. Coral reefs almost always start around a volcanic island, and they begin to form when just free swimming coral larvae attach to rocks that are submerged around the island. Now, as the polyps grow and expand and die, and then more grow on top of it, they form these colonies. And over time, that built up really skeletal remains of older colonies becomes a reef. The reef is then going to fill up with sand. It's going to get cemented into place by a kind of an algae. And of course, a lot of animals are going to want to live there. So there's three types of coral reef. There's a fringing reef, a barrier reef, and an atoll. So a fringing reef is one that has a pretty shallow lagoon between it and the shore. So you can see that that's a shallow, real shallow space, lagoon between the shore. When a fringing reef keeps growing upward from a volcanic island that's sunk below the surface of the water, that's called an atoll. So this is a fringing reef, but now the volcanic island has sunk down entirely below sea level. Atolls are usually a circle or an oval, and they've got an open lagoon in the middle. A barrier reef has a deeper lagoon that would be there. So those are the three kinds of reefs. The reef that we're dealing with here is a fringing reef. It is a really very rich ecosystem around these reefs. So let's take a look at some of the symbiotic relationships that we would find in these reefs, and you tell me which kind they are, which of the three kinds of symbiotic relationships they are. So we talked about this he mentioned this in one of the videos. This is one of the most well-known symbiotic relationships in coral. It's between the coral polyp, this is the coral polyp right here, and this zooxanthellae, that's a kind of algae. It actually lives inside the cells of the coral polyps. So the algae performs photosynthesis. Remember, coral's an animal. So coral is not a plant. It can't perform its own photosynthesis. The coral is an animal, so it has to take in food. Well, the algae makes that food. The algae performs photosynthesis, and it makes that food. And in exchange, what does the algae get? Well, it gets a place to live, and it gets access to sunlight. It's kind of protected there inside the cells of the algae, or the, polyp. So what kind of symbiosis is this? Is this parasitic, mutualistic, or commensalistic? Both are benefiting. And what kind of symbiosis do both benefit? Abigail. Yeah, it's going to be mutualistic. Yeah, a couple of you guys typed that down there too. Yes, that is mutualism because they're both benefiting. The zooxanthellae get a place to live. The coral get food. All right. So remember I said that that as sand gets in there and there's a kind of an algae that cements it all together. Well, this is it. This is called crustose coralline algae. So coral create the major structure. Think of coral as the bricks of the reef, but no brick wall is going to stand up if it doesn't have mortar keeping those bricks together. That's what this crustose coralline algae does. It forms a crust between the fragments of the dead coral, cementing the dead coral bricks together. So that really helps to strengthen the whole coral structure. And in return, the algae get a place to live because they're growing over the reef. So what is this? What kind of symbiosis? Anybody? Abigail.
Is this also mutualistic?
It is. It's also mutualism because they're both benefiting. The coral and algae is getting the place to live, and the coral reef itself is getting the cement that makes it hold together. All right, here's another example. Crabs and sea urchin. That's okay. You don't have to type. You can speak. It's fine. I actually prefer it when you guys talk rather than typing because I miss it sometimes. So crabs will sometimes use sea urchins for protection. They attach themselves to the spiny body. So nothing's going to go at that crab when it's attached to that sea urchin that way. So the crab gets a safe place to hide from predators. And the sea urchin doesn't seem to care. It's generally unaffected by the presence of the crab. It's not like the urchin benefits in any way, but the crab does. What kind of symbiosis is this?
How do you commensalism?
There you go. Good. Perfect, Zion. It is commensalism. Yep, that's it. One benefits, the other is unaffected. Commensalistic relationship. All right, here's another one here too. So the little green spots right there, those are copepods, and they live in or on the coral tissue, and they eat the coral polyps. They feed on it. Now, sometimes those copepods will even transmit pathogens, disease-causing microorganisms to the coral. Now, what do the copepods get? They get food and shelter. What do the coral get? Well, the health of the reef is threatened by this, negatively impacted. So what kind of relationship is this?
Parasitism.
Yeah, parasitism. Very good. That is a parasitic relationship. All right. If you've seen Finding Nemo, you're familiar with this, this little picture here. So clownfish. Clownfish will live among the tentacles of the anemone. So again, an anemone is an animal. It is not a plant. The anemone don't really seem to benefit from the clownfish being there, and they don't really seem to suffer from the clownfish being there. So if I asked you what kind of symbiosis it is, you might say that it was a commensalistic relationship because it's not mutually beneficial and it's not parasitic. But there's more to it than that, and there's often more to it than that. So look at that anemone. The anemone has stinging polyps. So anemones are predators. They'll attach themselves to rocks or the ocean floor or even a coral on a coral reef, and they just wait for fish to swim by close enough that they can get tangled up in their poisonous tentacles. Those tentacles then will paralyze the prey, and they will guide that prey then into the anemone's mouth. But they don't do that with clownfish. Clownfish actually call that anemone home. They live there. And they're able to do that because the clownfish are covered with a thick mucus layer. And that makes them immune to this deadly sting. So the clownfish are benefiting. Doesn't really look like the anemone is benefiting. But we have to remember that things aren't often the way we see them. Maybe there are unseen benefits here. And actually there are. So remember we talked about that zooxanthellae algae that lives inside the anemone's cells? Well, that zooxanthellae needs some nutrients that the anemone can't provide it. When the clownfish excretes its waste products, the waste products give the algae the nutrients that it needs, the sulfur, the ammonia, the phosphorus that it needs. It's also possible that the clownfish might help to feed the anemone, either by letting the anemone eat its leftovers or sometimes by luring other fish over to the anemone. So the anemone can catch them with its tentacles and it can have them for dinner. So it's possible that this is more of a mutualistic relationship. We have to remember that when we're talking about these kind of relationships, there's often more than one aspect. And a lot of times, many different kinds of relationships can exist. All right, here's another fun one. This is the pearlfish right here. And this is a sea cucumber. So pearlfish hide inside the body of the sea cucumber. And they do that for protection. They get shelter from predators by being inside the sea cucumber's body. The sea cucumber doesn't seem to be harmed or helped by the presence of the pearlfish. So this is an example of what kind of symbiosis? This is commensalism again, commensalism. One is helped, in this case, the pearlfish, the other is neither helped nor harmed. Again, we have to remember that we don't necessarily know for sure what, there may be something else going on that we're not aware of yet. All right, these little wrasse right here, they're called cleaner fish. And what they do is they will eat the parasites from larger fish. So they'll eat the parasites off both the outside and sometimes even the inside of the mouth of the other fish. So both of them benefit. The cleaner fish gets food and the bigger fish gets cleaned. So think about how this so this is a mutualistic one. They both benefit, but think about how this relationship maintains the overall health of that reef ecosystem. Interesting. So how do you guys think that that big fish knows it shouldn't eat the cleaner fish? Why doesn't it just swallow that cleaner fish down? It'll eat other fish. Why not this kind? Any thoughts?
Because it protects them from parasites.
It does. And it knows that. The cleaner fish does such a good job that the bigger fish will weigh the benefits and say, I'm way better off letting this cleaner fish eat my parasites than I would be eating it. It's a tiny fish. So eating it is not going to give that bigger fish very much energy at all. So when it doesn't eat it, it gets cleaned and its mouth and its skin are now parasite free and it's much healthier. So this is a good example of benefit outweighing, one benefit outweighing the effect of another one. I like this one. I like this symbiotic relationship. I think it's cute. This is a shrimp right here, down here, the orange and white striped is a shrimp. And this is a goby fish. So shrimp make burrows in the sand. They build and they take care of this burrow. They maintain it. The goby then goes into the burrow and it's protected by the burrow. So the goby serves as a lookout, signaling the shrimp when there are potential predators nearby. So both of them are going to benefit. This is a mutualistically beneficial relationship. It's an example of mutualism. They share a burrow. And this is what's really cute. When they leave the burrow, the shrimp, which can't see very well, keeps an antenna on the fish. It's constantly touching the fish so that it will be immediately aware of any danger. Kind of like little one holding the mom's hand as they cross the street, kind of that kind of an environment. All right, now this is an isopod. This right here, an isopod. So isopods attach to fish. Sometimes they even attach inside a fish's mouth and they feed on the blood and the bodily fluids of the fish, harming the host. What kind of symbiosis is this?
Parasitism.
Yeah, parasitism. So one of the things that we have to remember about parasitism is that, in an overall way, it's certainly not going to help the individual fish, but in an overall way, it can actually help the reef ecosystem and any ecosystem that parasites are in. No, I can't hear anything, Chris. Yeah, maybe test it in a minute. But they, so when a parasite attacks. Often parasites will attack the animals that are weak or sick or old, and it will actually help the whole species, the whole community, the whole population, because it'll kill off the ones that are not, probably not going to live anyway. So in a way, in a major way, parasites actually can help an ecosystem altogether. All right, I have a few more short symbiosis case stories. These are different. We're leaving behind the coral reef right now, and we'll just look at a couple individual examples here. So this is number one here. This is in India, and this small deer called a chatal has trouble finding enough grass to eat during the dry season. But the deer get help from a langur monkey, a gray langur monkey. The monkeys are messy eaters. They sit up in the treetops and they drop a lot of food as they eat. What is this an example of? Parasitism, commensalism, mutualism.
Commensalism.
Commensalism, right. The monkey isn't benefiting. It's just dropping its food. I always think of my little dog. I have a little tiny dog. She literally will stand underneath the face of the other dogs outside so that when people give them treats and the other dogs drop their treats, she gets them. So that is a commensalistic relationship. She gets a treat. The big dog doesn't care. It dropped it anyway. Same thing here. All right. Speaking of dogs, think about us and our pets. So, we get pets. We certainly benefit from our relationship with pets. We get the warm, fuzzy feeling that we get when we come home and our pet is happy that we arrive. Yeah, Zion, there you go. That's the kind of dog my dog likes to stand under. That's a big one there. But pets also benefit. We take care of them. We provide all of their needs. We feed them, we give them water, we give them health care, we give them lots of affection, we take them for walks and get them exercise. Perfect example of mutualism. Now, we talked about the cleaner fish with the bigger fish. Take a look at this example here. This is a crocodile, and inside its mouth, there is an Egyptian plover bird. Now, that crocodile lets that bird climb all over its body and even inside its mouth, so that it can eat some of the things that would be inside there, the parasites that would be inside the crocodile, cleaning its teeth, cleaning the inside of its mouth. Now, the bird benefits because it's getting some food. Another benefit that bird is getting is that it's getting protected from predators, because not many predators are going to get that close to a crocodile's mouth in order to attack the bird. So as long as that bird stays close to the crocodile, it's safe. So the bird is benefiting, the crocodile is benefiting. This is a perfect example of mutualism. How about this one here? Tree frogs use plants as protection. What kind of symbiosis? Chris.
Okay, I forgot which one. Oh, wait, can you guys hear my mic? Okay, I forgot which one it was, but
There's mutualism, commensalism, parasitism.
yeah, commensalism.
Yes, it is commensalism. Yeah, you just have to get that word in. I don't really have a trick for remembering that one. You can remember parasitism, you can remember mutualism. Commensalism is a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
All right, here is a good example of commensalism. So this is called lichen. Have you guys seen this on trees or fence posts or anywhere, rocks sometimes outside? So lichen is not a plant. It looks like a plant growing on the side of a tree, or a fungus growing on the side of a tree. It's actually a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae, or maybe a fungus and a kind of a bacteria called blue bacteria, cyanobacteria. Both of these organisms are going to benefit. They literally are attached to one another, this algae and fungi attached to one another, and grow everywhere. I think they're beautiful. They look very lacy and ruffly on the side of a tree. All right, any questions about symbiosis? All right, we just have a few minutes left here, so I want to talk a little bit about ecosystem changes. You'll be reading about that this week. So over time, ecosystems change. They're always changing. They change in response to natural things that happen in the environment, things like rains and floods and fire and volcanoes and earthquakes, all those natural interferences change ecosystems. Also, human interference can change an ecosystem. So what happens is, as old inhabitants to an area either die or move away, new ones move in, and that changes the whole community itself. Now, that change in both the land and the organisms that live there is called succession. That's what we call the change over time in an ecosystem. So there's two kinds of succession. There is primary and secondary. Now, primary succession happens in an area that was uninhabited before, and the first species to come back in are a pioneer species. So let's use an example here. Let's say we have a volcanic eruption, and that volcano erupts and the magma flows out, becomes lava, flows down the mountain and hardens. Now there's new rock. Nothing ever was living on that rock. There might have been something living under the lava before it hardened, but nothing was living on the lava itself. Now, over time, new species are going to come into that area, and the very first ones are called pioneer species. Often it's organisms like lichen that are the pioneer species. And as those pioneer species break down the rocks, they break the rock into sand, and they die, and they put nutrients into, into that rock particles, that forms soil. Once you have soil now, lots of new species can move in. Those new species that move in after the pioneer species lead to what's called, lead to a climax community eventually developing. The other kind of succession that we have is called secondary succession. Now, this happens where an area was inhabited before, but it's been disturbed by an event. So a wildfire is a good example of that. So you've got a forest, you've got a community right here. Fire comes in and destroys it. So now you're left with nothing but dirt, because all the living things have been destroyed by the fire. But there was life on this dirt before. So it isn't a primary succession. We have some organisms that come in and they start to grow. So the secondary succession begins when that disrupting event, in this case, the fire, isn't happening anymore. And under normal conditions, the ecosystem is going to recover. It will begin to return to normal. All right. Primary succession, there wasn't any life there before. Secondary succession, there was life there before. That's all there is to it. So let's do a couple cases and you tell me which it is. So we've got an area here that starts with bare rock. Dirt has to be created before plants and then animals can live there. What is the bare rock community? What kind of succession is that? If there was bare rock first.
Secondary.
So it would be primary because there never was anything living there before. We have to create dirt. The picture is a little misleading because there is dirt there, but I'm looking at the bare rock here. All right, so I'll give you a pass on that one. Let's look at this one here. This is a volcanic island being created. So magma comes up out of the volcano, flows down, and leaves behind rock. It leaves behind lava, which then hardens into that igneous rock. So what kind of succession will this island go through?
Primary.
Primary, right, because nothing was living on that hardened lava before now. What about a tornado that whips through a forest and rips up the trees? What kind of succession will this go through? Chris?
Second.
That's going to be secondary, right? Because something was living there. We're not going down to bare rock where there wasn't anything before. So it's going to be secondary succession. Glaciers melt. And when they do, they sometimes reveal rock where there was nothing before. What's that an example of?
Primary.
Primary. You got it. You got it. So look at this schematic. This here shows the primary succession. We've got our bare rock right here. Nothing was living there before. Lichen begin to move in and they take up life on the rock. Now they start breaking down that rock, and as they die, they add nutrients to the rock, and that's all soil is. You think about what is dirt, what is soil? Soil is some combination of rock or sand and clay and the remains of dead organisms. That's what soil is. So once the remains of these dead organisms builds up, now we have some soil. Once you have some soil, now you can get these small annual plants, grasses, more lichen. Then eventually you get perennial herbs and grasses, and then shade intolerant trees and some bigger shrubs and grasses. And then finally, we have what we call our climax community, which is your normal forest, what it looks like. So this is an example here of secondary succession. There was a hurricane that blew in and destroyed the land. Over time, though, that water's going to drain away and everything's going to grow back. So that is an example of secondary succession. This shows you how a forest fire can burn away everything and lead to, this is secondary succession as well, because the dirt is there. That's really basically the difference. Is in primary succession, it's bare rock. And on secondary succession, it is, there's already soil there. All right, let me see here. A couple more things I want to point out to you guys before you go into this, the reading for this week. I want to make sure that you understand the difference between biotic and abiotic. So living ecosystems have living and non-living things inside them. Biotic factors are the living ones and abiotic are the non-living ones. But it's important to know that abiotic does not mean dead. Dead leaves on a forest floor are biotic. They were once alive. If your desk that you're working on or your chair you're sitting on is made of wood, it's biotic. It's not alive now, but it was once. It was once a tree. And so it is a biotic factor. Abiotic factors are ones that are not and never were alive. Something made of plastic or rubber would be an abiotic factor. Natural things like air and water and rocks and dirt and sunshine or sunlight would be considered biotic or abiotic factors. And then finally, last thing I want to talk about today is this term niche. So niche is the ecological role an ecosystem plays. A lot of students think that the word niche means the place you live, like my home is my niche. That's not what it means in biology. It means the role that you play. What are your jobs in your ecosystem? It's possible that an ecological role or your niche would be to be eaten by a predator. You know, if you're a rabbit, the niche that you play is probably to be food for some predator somewhere. So the feeding relationships of species within a habitat and the interaction with other organisms are the niche that an organism plays. All right, that is it for today. Anybody have any questions? All right, have a great week. I will see you next week. Thanks. I'll
Have a
hang
good
out for a
day.
second. All right, thank you. Let me stop the recording here a minute.